My name is Marin Holloway and I am 34 years old. 3 months ago, the woman who was about to become my mother-in-law slid a small velvet box across a white linen tablecloth and told me, in front of her husband, her son, her sister, and a waiter who suddenly found something fascinating about the floor, that the ring on my finger did not belong to me. She used the word heirloom. She used the phrase in the family. She used a smile I had seen her practice in mirrors for 2 years. What she did not use was the truth. Because the ring she was reclaiming, the one she said had belonged to her mother and her mother before her, and that I, a girl who polishes other people's stones for a living, had no business wearing that ring had been sold out of her family 8 years before she ever knew my name. I know this because I am the person who sold it. I am a gemologist, 11 years certified. The kind of credential my fiancé's mother liked to call a cute little hobby at dinner parties, in the same tone she used for women who painted watercolors. For 2 years I had let her. Eyes had smiled. I had dimmed myself the way you turn down a lamp in a room where someone is sleeping, because I loved her son. And I thought love meant making yourself smaller in the doorway so the people who loved him first wouldn't feel the draft. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I wanted to tell you about that dinner, about the box, about the sound it made when it stopped. That small, soft thud, expensive and final, the sound of a verdict, and I want to tell you what I did next. Because Vivienne Ashcroft made one mistake that night. She assumed that the quietest woman at the table was the one with the least to say. She assumed that a girl who polishes other people's stones doesn't recognize the stones she's polished. She was wrong. This is hidden family revenge, and if you've ever made yourself smaller so the people who claim to love you could feel taller, stay with me. I think you already know how this story ends. I just don't think you know how it begins. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We're going back to the beginning. I want to tell you about my grandfather first, because nothing about that dinner makes sense without him. His name was Walter Holloway. Everybody called him Pop. He owned a small jewelry shop on the corner of Linden and 6th in a town called Ashford Hollow, Connecticut for 41 years. He died 4 years ago, in October, with a loop in his shirt pocket and a half-finished cup of coffee on his workbench. The coffee was still warm when I found him. Pop taught me how to read a stone the way other grandfathers teach you to fish. He'd hand me a diamond, sometimes a real one, sometimes glass. He liked to test me and he'd say, "Tell me where it's been." And I'd hold it up to the light, and I'd look for the small cloudy ghost in the middle where heat had been pressed into it, or the tiny scratch on the table where a careless hand had set it down on something it shouldn't have, and I'd start to talk. "A stone tells you who's been holding it," he used to say. "It remembers every hand. People think a diamond is forever because it's hard. It isn't. It's forever because it's honest. A diamond is the only thing in this world that can't lie about where it's been. I want you to hold on to that. I'll need you to remember it later." Pop left me 3 things when he died. He left me his workbench, a 120-year-old slab of oak with a hollow worn into it from his forearm, the shape of him preserved in the wood like a fossil. He left me his loop, a German one from 1962, the kind you can't buy anymore because the man who made them only made 12. And he left me one safe deposit box at the Ashford Savings Bank with a small handwritten note that said, "For when you need it, not before, you'll know." Pop, I hadn't opened the box. For 4 years, I hadn't opened it. I told myself I was waiting for the right reason. The truth is, I was afraid he'd left me something I wasn't ready to be. I met Soren Ashcroft at an estate auction in Hartford 2.5 years ago. He was bidding on a piece of furniture for his mother, a writing desk, French, walnut, late 1800s, and he was bidding badly. I leaned over and told him he was about to pay 3 times what it was worth. He looked at me like I'd just saved his life. We had coffee an hour later. He proposed 11 months after that. He proposed with a ring I had never seen before. I want to be honest with you about this part. The moment he opened the box, I knew something about the ring. I didn't know what. I just knew the way you know that a song you're hearing in a grocery store is one you used to dance to in a kitchen 10 years ago. The shape was familiar. The cut, an old European cut, slightly off-round, the kind nobody makes anymore because nobody has the patience, was familiar. The setting, 6 prongs in white gold, was familiar. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that all old rings look a little alike if you've spent enough years staring at them. I told myself it didn't matter. Because what mattered was the man holding the box and the question he was asking, and the answer was yes, and I said it, and I meant it, and I still mean it. But the ring sat heavy on my hand on the drive home that night. The way a stone sits heavy when it's trying to tell you something you don't want to know. I want to tell you 3 things about Vivian Ashcroft. The first time I met her in her kitchen in Ashford Hollow, she took me aside and said, "Soren has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. Please don't break him." Her hand was shaking when she said it, not performing, shaking. I have held on to that moment for 2 years like a stone in my pocket. The second thing. 6 months after I met her, she introduced me at her garden club luncheon as Soren's friend, not fiancé, not girlfriend, friend. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she'd misspoken. I told myself maybe I was overthinking it. The third thing. Last Christmas, she gave Soren's cousin a vintage cocktail ring from the family vault. She told the room it had belonged to her grandmother. I recognized it immediately. It had been appraised by my grandfather's firm in 2018. The seller of record was Margot Ashcroft Penn, Vivienne's older sister. I had cataloged it myself. I didn't say anything. I drank my wine. I smiled. I think that was the moment I started disappearing. I just didn't know it yet. The dinner was on a Saturday, the first Saturday in March. It was cold for that time of year, the kind of cold that gets into the seams of your coat and stays there. The restaurant was called Beaumont's, 2 towns over from Ashford Hollow, the kind of place that puts a small dish of butter in front of you with a tiny silver knife resting on the rim, as if the butter itself were a piece of jewelry. Vivian had chosen it, she always chose. Soren had stopped suggesting alternatives sometime in his 20s. I was wearing a navy dress. I remember that specifically because Vivian, when she walked in, looked at me for 1 full second too long and said, "Oh, Marin, navy. How brave for March." And then she sat down and unfolded her napkin and ordered a martini without looking at the waiter. There were 6 of us at the table: Vivian, Gerald, her husband, Soren, me. Vivian's sister, Margot, who had flown in from Charleston the day before and who had not stopped looking at me since I walked in, not unkindly, but the way a person looks at a door they're about to walk through. And a man named Idris Halloran, an old family friend, who I would later learn was there for a reason that had nothing to do with friendship. The first hour was small talk, the garden club, Gerald's golf, a nephew's college acceptance. Vivian told a story about her grandmother that I had heard 4 times. I laughed in the right places. I asked the right questions. I made myself easy to be around the way I had made myself easy to be around for 2 years, the way you smooth the wrinkles out of a tablecloth before company comes. It was after the entrees were cleared and before dessert had arrived. That specific window. That dangerous quiet between courses where nobody knows what to do with their hands. Vivian reached into her purse. It was a small black quilted bag with a gold chain, the kind of bag that says, "I have always belonged here," without saying anything at all. She set it on her lap. She opened the clasp. She took out a velvet box, maroon, small, the kind of box that holds exactly 1 ring. She set the box on the tablecloth. She didn't open it. She just rested her fingertips on the lid, the way you rest your fingertips on the lid of a piano before you play the first note. And she looked at me. "Marin, dear," she said. Her voice was light. The lightest I'd ever heard it. "I've been meaning to have a conversation with you for some time." Soren, beside me, went very still. Gerald reached for his water glass. Margot did not look up from her plate. "The ring my son gave you," Vivian said. "It's a lovely piece. Truly. And I know how much it must mean to you." She paused and she smiled, and the smile was the one I had seen her practice. "But it's also a family piece, an Ashcroft piece. My mother wore it. Her mother wore it before her. And I really do think, that what's best for everyone is if we return it to the family vault, and Soren can choose something for you that is yours. Yours alone, untouched by all our complicated history." She slid the box across the tablecloth toward me. The motion was small, practiced, almost gentle. The box stopped 6 inches from my hand. It made a sound. I'm not going to forget that sound. A small soft thud, expensive and final, the sound of a verdict that had been written before any of us sat down. The waiter, somewhere behind me, suddenly needed to refold a napkin at the next table. He did it carefully. He did it for a long time. I sat there. I felt the air in my lungs become aware of itself. I felt the navy dress against my back. I felt the cold tip of my engagement ring against the warm skin of my finger. And I felt, and this is the part I want you to understand, I felt the ring move. Not literally. The ring didn't move. But something's in me, looking down at it, recognized it the way you recognize a face in a crowd you'd convinced yourself was a stranger. The old European cut, the slight off-roundness, the 6 prongs. The small interior cloud at 4 o'clock that I had documented 8 years ago in an appraisal report I had written by hand and signed and notarized and filed in a drawer in a workshop in a town not 20 minutes from this restaurant. I knew the ring, I had appraised the ring, I had sold the ring. I looked up at Vivienne. She was still smiling. She was waiting for me to do the dignified thing, the small thing, the easy thing, the thing women like me had been doing at tables like this for 100 years. She was waiting for me to take the ring off my finger and place it inside the velvet box and slide it back across the linen and thank her for her honesty. Every part of me wanted to do something different. Every part of me wanted to stand up. Every part of me wanted to take that box and open it and ask her, in front of Gerald, in front of Margot, in front of Idris Halloran, whose face I could not yet read, what exactly was inside it? Because I had a fairly good guess, and I didn't think she would like the answer. I didn't do it. I sat there, I put my left hand in my lap. I felt the ring against the fabric of my dress. I said, Vivienne, thank you for being so honest with me. I'd like to think about it before I do anything. My voice was steady. I don't know how. The waiter began folding a different napkin. Vivienne's smile tightened, just slightly, at the corners. Of course, dear, she said. Take all the time you need. The box will be right here. She did not move the box. Soren reached for my hand under the table. I let him take it. Palm was sweating. I have never in 2.5 years felt his palm sweat. Margot finally looked up. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say anything. But she gave me the smallest, slowest, saddest shake of her head. A movement so small that anyone not looking for it would have missed it. I was looking for it. Dessert came. I don't remember what it was. I remember the velvet box. I remember the smell of butter. I remember the cold tip of my engagement ring against my finger, warming slowly to my skin, the way a stone warms when a hand is finally honest about holding it. We drove home in silence. Soren drove. I sat in the passenger seat with the velvet box in my lap. I hadn't put the ring inside it. I hadn't taken the ring off. Vivienne had not asked me to before we left. That would have been gauche. And Vivienne was many things but never gauche in public, and so the box sat empty between my knees. Like an open question I was carrying home for further study. Soren tried twice to start a sentence, Marin, I, and then nothing. I didn't, and then nothing. The third time he didn't try. He just put his hand on my knee, briefly, and then took it back to the wheel. When we pulled into our driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there with both hands on the wheel and said, very quietly, I had no idea she was going to do that. I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed him completely. I know, I said. What do you want to do? He asked. I looked at the velvet box. I looked at the ring on my finger. I looked at my fiancé, the man I loved, the man who had said yes to me as much as I had said yes to him, and I said the only true thing I could think of. I need to make some phone calls. Can you give me until Tuesday? He said yes, he said anything. He said, Marin, anything. I went inside, and I went to the small room off our kitchen where I keep my work, and I closed the door. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat down at my desk, and I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I took out my grandfather's loupe, the 1962 German one. The one I had kept in its leather case on the corner of my desk, like a relic, like a saint's bone, like something too important to use for daily life. I screwed it into my eye. I held my left hand up to the lamp. I looked at the ring. It took me about 11 seconds. The cloud at 4 o'clock. Tiny, whitish, the shape of a comma. I had drawn that comma by hand on an appraisal sheet in 2017, in pencil, with a small arrow pointing to it and a note in my own handwriting. Distinctive feather inclusion, 4 o'clock position. Old European cut, approximately 2.4 carats, J color, VS2 clarity, estate piece, likely 1910 to 1925, seller requests, discretion. I knew exactly where the file was. I knew exactly what it said. I knew exactly who had brought the ring into Pop's shop and signed for the sale. The seller of record was Margot's Ashcroft pen. I sat back in my chair. I took the loupe out of my eye. I looked at the ceiling for a long time, and I tried to think about what I knew and what I didn't, and what I needed to find out before Tuesday. What I knew was this. The ring on my finger had been brought to my grandfather's shop in October of 2017 by Margot's Ashcroft pen, Vivienne's older sister, who had inherited the bulk of the Ashcroft jewelry from their mother. Because, as I would later learn, their mother had been very clear about which daughter she trusted with the family. Margot had been quietly selling pieces through Pop's firm for over a decade, not because she was greedy, because she was solvent and the rest of the family wasn't, and somebody had to keep the lights on at the Ashford Hollow house. And Vivienne, who was the public face of the Ashcroft name, had developed a habit of not asking where the money came from as long as it kept coming. What I knew was that this particular ring, the one on my finger, had not been bought back by any Ashcroft. It had been sold in 2019 to a private buyer. I remembered the sale because Pop had personally handled it. I remembered the buyer because Pop had remarked on the name afterward, in that quiet way he had, where he'd half smile and say something like, "Now that's an interesting choice." And the name had been Soren Ashcroft. Soren had bought his mother's family heirloom back from the seller, his own aunt, through a small estate jewelry firm in Ashford Hollow. Soren had bought the ring himself, with his own money. 2 years before he met me, Vivienne did not know. Vivienne, sitting at that dinner table, sliding that velvet box across that white linen, had been so confident in her ownership of a story she had only ever told one side of. The Ashcrofts had not always had this ring. They had had it and lost it. And Vivienne had never been told it was lost, because the women in her family had decided long ago that what Vivienne didn't know couldn't be performed about at garden club luncheons. I sat in my office, I set the loop down, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh you laughed when you finally understand a joke that was made at your expense 2 years ago, and you realize the joke wasn't even particularly clever. I called Nell Kerrigan at 10:15 that night. Nell is my closest friend. We met in graduate school. She is 5 feet of dry-eyed Boston Irish skepticism in a cardigan, and she answers her phone at any hour because she does not believe in voicemail. "Tell me," she said before I'd said hello. I told her. There was a long pause, and then Nell, who has a particular gift for asking the question that breaks a problem in half, said, "Marin, have you opened the box yet?" I knew exactly which box she meant. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because I was waiting for the right reason." "Honey," she said. "If this isn't the right reason, you don't have one." I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. She said, "Go to bed. Open it Monday. And before you do anything else, call Margot." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because she's the only one at that table who didn't lie to your face. And I'd bet you $100 she's waiting for you to call." The next morning was Sunday. Soren went for a long run, the way he does when he doesn't know what to say. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me, and at 9:47, before I'd even worked up the courage to dial, my phone rang. It was Margot Ashcroft Penn. "Marin," she said, "I owe you a conversation. I want to describe Margot to you. She is 6 years older than Vivienne. She lives in Charleston in a house she bought outright with money nobody in Ashford Hollow understands. She was married once, briefly in her 20s. She has no children. She wears reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she does not, as a rule, attend Vivienne's events. She had flown up for this dinner specifically, I now realized, because somebody had told her what Vivienne was planning, and she had wanted to be in the room when it happened. "Margot," I said, "I think I know some of it." "Do you know all of it?" "I know the ring is one I appraised in 2017. I know you sold it. I know my fiancé bought it back in 2019. I don't know why she thinks it's hers." There was a long quiet on the line. Then Margot said, "Because we never told her, dear, about any of it." "Any of what?" "The selling, the shop. The fact that the Ashcroft jewelry collection she's been bragging about for 30 years has been in a vault in Hartford for 15 of them. And not the kind of vault she imagines. The kind of vault belonging to a girl named Marin Holloway and her grandfather, who I have been quietly grateful for since 2008. I sat down. I had not realized I was standing. "You knew who I was," I said, "when Soren brought me to that first dinner. I knew your grandfather, Marin. I knew his shop. I knew his handwriting on every appraisal in my safe. And when Soren brought you home and introduced you as his girlfriend, a gemologist from Ashford Hollow named Holloway, I almost spit out my wine. I thought, Walter, you old fox. You found a way to put your granddaughter exactly where I needed her to be. You think Pop planned this. I think your grandfather never let an accident happen that he hadn't already had a hand in. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, Marin, my sister has spent 30 years telling people she comes from money. And her son has spent 30 years watching her do it. And somewhere along the way, Soren figured out the math didn't work. He started asking me questions when he was 19. By 23, he knew the whole story. By 26, he was buying pieces back from me when he could afford them. He bought that ring, dear, because his grandmother, our mother, the woman my sister claims to be honoring, wore that ring on her wedding day in 1948, and Soren wanted you to wear it too. He didn't tell Vivian because Vivian would have made it about her. He didn't tell you because, well, I think you know why he didn't tell you. I did know. He didn't tell me because he didn't want me to know how much he'd spent. He didn't tell me because the math of love and money in the Ashcroft family was a subject he had inherited a complicated relationship to. He didn't tell me because some men, when they're trying to do a beautiful thing, would rather you not see the cost of it. I had married. I was going to marry. A better man than I had even known. Margot, I said, what does Vivian think she's doing? There was a long sigh on the other end of the line, the kind of sigh that has been held for 30 years. She thinks, Margot said, that you are not good enough. She thinks the ring is the test. She has convinced herself that if you take it off, you'll prove you don't care about the family enough to fight for the symbol. And if you don't take it off, she'll have a reason to tell Soren you're materialistic. She's set up a door, dear, with a trap on both sides. The ring isn't really the point. You are. I was quiet for a long time. Margot, I said, you flew up here on purpose. I did. Why? Because my sister has been doing this to people her whole life, Marin. And I've watched it. And I'm tired of watching it. And I think, for once in this family, somebody is going to walk into that trap and walk out of it with the door. I asked her then, the question I had been carrying since the velvet box had stopped on the tablecloth. Margot, what's in the box? She laughed, a small dry laugh. I don't know for sure, dear. But knowing my sister, it's nothing, an empty box. Or a costume piece she pulled out of an old jewelry drawer. The point isn't what's in it. The point is what she expected you to put in it. I thanked her. I told her I would be in touch. She said, Marin, one more thing. If you do what I think you're going to do it kindly. She is still my sister, and she is still your fiancé's mother. There is a way to tell the truth that doesn't have to set the whole house on fire. I promised her I would think about that. I didn't call Soren that day. I needed to do one thing first. I needed to open Pop's box. But before I tell you what was inside it, I want to stop here. I want to ask you something. If you were in that car on Saturday night, with a velvet box onto your lap and a man who loved you driving silently beside you, and you knew the way you would have known that the woman who'd set the trap had built it for you long before you'd ever walked into her house, would you tell him? Right there, in the car, or would you wait? Drop the word tell in the comments if you would have said something Saturday night. Drop the word wait if you'd have done what I did, and let the trap close on the woman who said it. I'm asking because I genuinely still wonder which would have been right. Monday morning, I drove to the Ashford Savings Bank. I parked in the same lot I had parked in for 4 years every time I'd come close to opening the box and turned around. I went inside. I signed in. I gave the bank officer the small brass key Pop had left in an envelope with my name on it. She walked me back. She slid the box out of the wall. She put it on the table in front of me. She left the room. For a moment, I couldn't open it. My hands actually shook. I was 34 years old, and I was about to find out what my grandfather had thought I would, one day, need badly enough to come and find. I opened the box. Inside, there were 3 things. There was a leather portfolio, old, soft, the kind of leather that has memorized somebody's hand. There was a small velvet pouch, and there was an envelope with my name on it, in Pop's handwriting. I picked up the envelope first. Pop's letter was 3 pages long. I will not read you the whole thing. Some of it is between him and me. But I'll tell you what mattered, and I'll tell you in his words where I can. He wrote, Marin, if you're reading this, you've finally needed me for something I couldn't give you in person. I'm so sorry I'm not there. I'd rather be there. But here's what I left you, and here's why. He wrote about the leather portfolio. Inside this folder are the appraisal records in my own hand for every piece of jewelry I ever bought from Margot Ashcroft Penn between 1994 and 2019. 23 pieces, every certificate, every chain of custody, every notarized signature. If you ever need to prove what the Ashcroft family had and what they no longer have, this folder is the proof. I kept duplicates of everything because I learned a long time ago, kid, paper outlives people. and some people need outliving. He wrote about the velvet pouch. Inside this pouch is a ring. It was your grandmother's. She wore it for 46 years. I made it for her in 1959, the year I asked her to marry me, before I had the money to make her anything fancy. The stone is small. The setting is hand-cut. I would not trade it for any diamond I ever sold. I want you to have it, not as a backup, not as a consolation. As a reminder that the most valuable thing a stone can do is belong to somebody who loves it. Wear it when you're ready, or don't wear it at all, but have it. And then he wrote the part that knocked the breath out of me. You will probably figure out, eventually, that I had reasons for steering you towards certain rooms in your life. I am not going to apologize for that. Margot's family was kind to me when nobody else in Ashford Hollow would buy stones from a Jewish jeweler in 1971. I owed them. And I watched, over the years, what one of those women did to people she thought were beneath her. I did not interfere because it wasn't my house. But Marin, if you have walked into that house, and you have been made to feel small in it, you do not have to stay small. You have everything you need in this box. You always have. I'm only the one who kept it organized. He signed it. Love you, kid. Don't let anyone polish you the way you polish stones. Pop. I sat in that little bank room for 40 minutes. I cried. I want to be honest with you about that. I cried the kind of crying you do when you've been holding something for 4 years and you didn't even know you were holding it. Then I opened the portfolio. It was exactly what he had said, 23 appraisals, handwritten, signed, notarized, photographed. Each one paper-clipped to a small color photograph of the piece. Chain of custody letter from Margot and a bill of a sale to the eventual buyer. 8 of the pieces had been bought back by Soren Ashcroft between 2018 and 2023, including the ring on my finger. 15 of them had been sold to other private buyers and were no longer in the Ashcroft family at all. Vivienne, at her garden club luncheons, was wearing reproductions. 2 of them I knew for a fact, because I had made them myself in Pop's workshop the year I came home for the summer between graduate school terms. Costume pieces. Cubic zirconia in silver-plated settings. Pop had charged Margot nothing for them. He had simply said, she'll never know. He'd been right. Vivienne had never known. I opened the velvet pouch. Pop's ring for my grandmother was the simplest thing in the world. A small, champagne-colored diamond, perhaps a half carat, in a thin hand-cut gold band with a tiny scroll engraved on the inside. Held it up to the light. The stone behaved exactly the way I remembered. The kind of stone that doesn't flash, doesn't show off, just glows. I slid it on my right hand, ring finger. It fit. I sat there in the little bank room with my grandmother's ring on one hand and Vivienne's so-called family heirloom on the other, and I understood for the first time what Pop had been trying to tell me my whole life. A stone tells you who's been holding it. The ring on my left hand had been held by my fiancé. He had paid for it. He had chosen it. He had given it to me with love. It was mine. The ring on my right hand had been held by my grandmother for 46 years and my grandfather for 60, and it had been held by love so steady that the gold itself had warmed to the temperature of the woman who wore it. Vivienne Ashcroft had been holding nothing. She had been performing the holding of something that had been sold out from under her by her own sister, with my own grandfather's help, while she was busy telling people she came from money. I left the bank with the portfolio under my arm. I did not go home. I drove to Pop's old workshop. I still owned it. I had not opened it in 2.5 years, not since I'd started dating Soren, not since I'd started, without admitting it to myself, dimming the parts of my life that didn't fit cleanly into the Ashcroft kitchen. The door stuck. It always stuck. I shouldered it open. The bell above it rang the same way it had rung when I was 9 years old. I stood in the middle of the workshop. The afternoon light came in through the front window the same way it had come in for 41 years. Pop's bench was still where he'd left it. His tools were still in the drawers, in the exact order he'd kept them, because no one had needed to move them, because no one had needed to use them, because I had been too afraid of who I would become if I sat down at that bench without him. I caught my reflection in the front window. I want to tell you what I saw, because this is the part of the story that I haven't told anyone. Not Nell, not Margot, not Soren. I saw a woman in a navy dress. I saw a woman who had spent 2 years making herself small enough to fit into a kitchen in Ashford Hollow, where she had never been welcome. I saw a woman who had let her grandfather's loop sit in a leather case on the corner of her desk for 4 years, because she was afraid of what it would tell her if she put it to her eye. I saw a woman who had been polishing herself to a high shine so that the people who looked at her would only see the surface, not the inclusions. I did not recognize her. I want to be specific about what almost happened next. I went to my purse. I took out my phone. I drafted a text to Soren. It said, "Babe, I've been thinking. Just give the ring back. Tell your mom I'm sorry. Pick out something new with me. It's not worth the war." I read it 3 times. I deleted it. I drafted it again. I read it 4 times. I deleted it again. I sat down on Pop's stool. The seat was worn into the shape of him. I sat in his shape. I put my hands flat on his bench. And I felt, for the first time in 4 years, like I was actually inside my own life, instead of standing outside it, apologizing for being there. I wasn't angry yet. The anger would come later, in waves, in the middle of meetings I couldn't focus on. Right then, I felt something simpler. Clarity. The kind that doesn't arrive with a sound. It arrives like a door that's been stuck for years, finally clicking open. I picked up Pop's loop. I looked through it at the afternoon light. The world, through Pop's loop, looked exactly the way it had looked when I was 9. I made a decision. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I didn't slam a fist. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just decided. I decided that on Tuesday night, when I went to Vivienne's house for the dinner she had already invited us to, a follow-up, she had called it, to clear the air, I was going to bring the leather portfolio. I was not going to bring it angry. I was not going to bring it to humiliate. I was going to bring it the way Pop had brought me to bitter auctions when I was 12, as a gemologist, with the documentation, to do the work in front of me with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're holding. I called Soren that night. I told him I needed him to do 3 things. First, on Tuesday, I needed him to let me speak even when his mother interrupted, which she would. Second, I needed him to be honest with his mother, when the moment came, about where the ring had come from, not to defend me, to defend the truth. There is a difference, and I needed him to know that. Third, I needed him to understand that what was about to happen Tuesday night was not about me hurting his mother. It was about his mother hurting herself for the last time on me. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Marin, what do you know?" I said, "I know you bought the ring from your aunt in 2019. I know your mother thinks she still owns it. I know she has been telling everyone in Ashford Hollow that the Ashcroft jewelry collection lives in her vault, when 15 of those pieces have been gone for years, and 2 of the ones she wears most often are pieces my grandfather and I made for her in his workshop out of costume stones. I know everything, Soren, and I love you, and I don't blame you for any of it. But Tuesday night, I am not going to sit at a table and pretend I don't know what I know." He started to cry, quietly. I had never heard him cry on the phone before. He said, "I wanted to tell you, I didn't know how. I thought if you knew, you'd think I was. I don't know what I thought. I thought you'd feel like the ring wasn't real if you knew the whole story." I said, "Soren, the ring is the realest thing your family has produced in 30 years. You bought your grandmother's ring back, with your own money, to give it to a woman you love. There is nothing about that story I would change, except the part where you carried it alone." He said, "Okay." He said, "Tuesday." He said, "I'll be there. I want to stop here before I tell you about Tuesday, because what's about to happen at Vivienne Ashcroft's dinner table is the moment that this entire story has been moving toward, and I want you to know one thing before it happens. I was not going there to win. I was not going there to humiliate. I had spent the weekend reading Pop's letter and holding my grandmother's ring and sitting on Pop's stool, and I had come to one conclusion, which was this. Vivienne Ashcroft was not the villain of my life. She was the architect of her own. I was going there to stop being a tenant in a house she was building out of my dignity. Tuesday came. We arrived at 6. Vivienne answered the door in a cream silk blouse and pearls. She kissed me on both cheeks. She told me I looked rested. She told Soren he looked thin. She walked us into the dining room. Same 6 people over there. Vivienne, Lingthick, Gerald, Soren, me. Margot, who had stayed an extra 3 days, ostensibly to see an old friend, actually to be in this room. And Idris Halloran, who had been at the first dinner, and who I now understood had been there in his professional capacity. He was an attorney. Vivienne had brought a lawyer to the first dinner. I had not noticed at the time. I noticed she had set the table beautifully. She always did. Real linen, real silver. A small arrangement of white lilies in the center, which Vivienne had probably been told once by a magazine were elegant, and which she now used at every gathering, whether they suited the season or not. The velvet box was not on the table. I noticed that immediately. Vivienne had not wanted to put it out before I arrived. She wanted to bring it out at the right moment. She wanted theater. I had brought the leather portfolio. It was in my bag under my chair. I had not mentioned it. We made it through cocktails. We made it through the first course. We made it through the entree. Vivienne talked. Gerald nodded. Soren held my hand under the table the entire time, and his palm was no longer sweating, which I think was the first sign that something in him had shifted. After the entree, Vivienne stood up. She walked to the sideboard. She picked up the maroon velvet box. She walked back to the table. She set it down in front of her own place setting, not mine this time, and she rested her fingertips on the lid in that same practiced way. She said, "Marin, dear, I gave you time to think. I assume you've come to the right decision." I said, "I have, Vivienne." She smiled. I said, "I'd like to show you something first, if I may." I reached down. I lifted the leather portfolio onto the table. It made a soft thud, much like the velvet box had made 4 days before. Vivienne's smile did something interesting at the corners. I opened the portfolio. I laid out 3 documents in front of her. I did it slowly, the way you lay out tools before you start the work. The first document was the appraisal sheet for the ring on my finger, dated October 12, 2017, handwritten by Walter Holloway, signed and notarized. The second was the bill of sale from Margot's Ashcroft pen to Holloway Estate Jewelers, dated October 14, 2017, in the amount of $48,000. The third was the bill of sale from Holloway Estate Jewelers to Soren Ashcroft, dated June 8, 2019, in the amount of $52,500. I did not say anything for a moment. I let her look at them. I watched her face. She did not pick the papers up. She looked at them on the table the way a person looks at a small animal that has just walked into their kitchen. Idris Halloran, beside her, looked at the papers. Then he looked at Vivienne. Then he looked very carefully at his water glass. Margot, across from me, did not look at the papers. She was looking at her sister. Gerald cleared his throat. He started to say something. He stopped. Vivienne looked up at me. Her face had gone still. Not angry, just still. Like a woman watching the only house she's ever lived in catch fire. She said very quietly, "I don't understand what these are." I said, "I think you do, Vivienne." I said, "But I want to be respectful, so I'll explain. The ring you returned to me on Saturday. The one you said was an Ashcroft heirloom that needed to come back to the family vault, was sold out of the Ashcroft family in October of 2017. Your sister Margot sold it to my grandfather's firm. I personally appraised it. My handwriting is on this sheet. My grandfather paid your sister $48,000 for it. The ring sat in our inventory for 19 months. In June of 2019, your son Soren bought the ring back, with his own money, from my grandfather, 2 years before he met me, because he wanted his grandmother's ring on the finger of the woman he was eventually going to ask to marry him." I paused. I said, "I have 8 more appraisals in this folder, Vivienne. 8 pieces of jewelry that have been bought back by your son between 2018 and 2023. I have 15 more appraisals of pieces that left your family entirely and were not bought back. I have notarized photographs of every one of them. I have receipts for 2 pieces that you currently wear, which were made in my grandfather's workshop, by me, out of costume materials in 2014 as a favor to your sister." I paused again. I said, "I am not telling you any of this to hurt you. I am telling you this because on Saturday you slid a velvet box across a table at a restaurant, and you asked me to put a ring inside it. And I would like to know, Vivienne, and I am asking you sincerely, which ring did you think you were taking back?" Vivienne did not answer. She sat there. Her hand, the one that had been resting on the velvet box, came up to her throat, to the pearls. She touched them. She didn't seem to know she was doing it. Idris Halloran, the lawyer, spoke first. He said very carefully, "Vivienne, I think we should perhaps continue this conversation privately." I said, "Mr. Halloran, with respect." I asked Vivienne the question. I'd like to give her a chance to answer it before we adjourn. He did not look at me. He looked at Vivienne. Vivienne did not look at anyone. Gerald finally did something I had not seen him do in 2.5 years. He spoke, not to me, to his wife. He said, "Viv, what did you put in that box?" She did not answer him either. He reached across the table. He picked up the velvet box. He opened it. Inside, on a small bed of white satin, was a ring, gold band, a clear stone, round cut. The setting was wrong, too modern by about 50 years. The stone was too clean, too sharp, too perfectly white. I knew, before I had even put my loop to it, what it was. It was a cubic zirconia, in a silver-plated band that had been gold flashed to look like gold. It was at most an $80 piece. It was the kind of ring you would buy at a department store costume counter. It was almost certainly one Vivienne herself had picked at some point, because the real ring it was meant to replace had been sold years ago, and she had been wearing the replacement and not known. Margot, across the table, made a small sound. It might have been a laugh. She covered it with her hand. Gerald set the box down. He looked at his wife. He looked at me. He looked at his son. He looked, for one long moment, at the lilies in the center of the table. Then he stood up and he walked to the sideboard and he poured himself a scotch, neat, and he came back and he sat down and he took a long drink and he said, "To no one in particular, I have been trying to tell her for 15 years. Vivienne then finally moved. She stood up. She did it slowly. She put her napkin on the table beside her plate. She did not look at any of us. She said, I think I'd like to go upstairs for a moment." She walked out of the dining room. We sat in the silence she left behind. Gerald drank his scotch. Idris Halloran began very quietly to put his papers back into his briefcase. Margaux reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. Soren, beside me, said, "Mom?" He started to get up. I put my hand on his arm. I said, "Let her go." He looked at me. He looked at his father. His father nodded once. Soren sat down. "I will tell you what happened over the next 3 weeks, because I think the slow part is more important than the fast part. The fast part, the dinner, the documents, the velvet box, is the part you came for. The slow part is the part that matters." Margot flew home to Charleston on Thursday. Before she left, she sat with me in a coffee shop in Hartford for 2 hours, and she told me everything she had not told me on the phone. About their mother. About the slow draining of the Ashcroft money over 2 generations. About the year Vivienne had married Gerald, who was solidly upper middle class, and not the old money match Vivienne had always pretended he was. About the long performance of wealth that Vivienne had constructed, because she had been the younger sister, the prettier sister, the one their mother had not trusted with the jewelry. And she had spent 40 years trying to prove their mother wrong by wearing things that weren't hers. Margot said, at the end, "She'll never apologize to you, Marin, not directly. That's not how she's built. But the apology will come, in small ways. Watch for them." She was right about that. Idris Halloran sent me a letter the next week. It was brief. It said he had been asked by Vivienne to draft a document on Saturday night that would have required me to return the ring as a gift to the family in exchange for a small payment with a non-disclosure clause attached. He said he had advised her against it. He said he had attended the dinner only to observe. He said he had been impressed by the way I had handled the situation. He said he was sending me his card in case you ever require representation in matters of estate provenance. It was, in its way, the closest thing to a public apology a Connecticut estate lawyer is capable of giving. Gerald called me the following Tuesday. He said, "Marin, I just want to say, I should have done a lot of things differently for a long time. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm sorry." He did not say much else. He didn't need to. The sentence was short. It was honest. It was, I suspect, the first apology Gerald Ashcroft had given anyone in a very long time. I told him I appreciated him saying so. I told him I hoped we could find our way to a relationship that did not require either of us to perform anything. He said he'd like that. The grapevine in Ashford Hollow worked the way grapevines in towns like Ashford Hollow always work. Within 10 days, Vivienne had stopped attending garden club. Within 2 weeks, she had stopped going to St. Catherine's on Sundays. The story that got around town was not even the worst version. It was, in fact, a fairly gentle version, that there had been a misunderstanding about a piece of family jewelry, that Vivienne had been embarrassed, and that the new bride was evidently quite knowledgeable. About gems, that last part was deliberate. I think it was Margot's doing. Sorens and I sat down together 2 weeks after the dinner. He apologized to me, not for the dinner. He apologized for the 2 years he had let his mother diminish me at her table without standing up. He said he had told himself it was easier to keep the peace. He said he had learned the hard way that peace bought with somebody else's dignity is not peace. It's just a slower kind of war. I forgave him. I forgave him because I love him. And because he is a man who bought his grandmother's ring back from his aunt with his own money 2 years before he met me. And because some men carry beautiful things alone for too long, because no one ever taught them they could ask for help. We are still getting married. The wedding is in October. Vivienne has been invited. We do not know yet if she will come. The ring on my left hand is the same ring. I am not changing it. Pop's letter said a stone is worth what it can remember, and this stone has remembered enough now to wear forever. The ring on my right hand is my grandmother's. I wear both. I plan to wear both for the rest of my life. It has been 6 months since that Tuesday dinner. I want to tell you what's different now, because I think the small things are the part nobody warns you about. I opened Pop's workshop. Fully. Not just to walk through. To work in. I have moved my appraisal business out of the small office in our house and into the front room of the shop on Linden and 6th. The bell above the door rings the same way it rang when I was 9. My client list has tripled. I cannot tell you how exactly. Word of mouth in Ashford Hollow moves in ways I have stopped trying to understand. Margot likes to say it's Pop, working from wherever he is. I don't disagree with her. I have hired one apprentice, a young woman named Tess. She is 23, and she came to me through a friend of Nell's. She has good hands and a better ear, and she asks me questions I have to think before I answer, which is the highest compliment I can pay anyone. I teach her the way Pop taught me. I hand her a stone, and I say, "Tell me where it's been." The leather portfolio sits in my desk drawer. I have not looked at it since Tuesday. I do not need to. The work it did is done. Vivienne has not apologized to me. Margot's was right about that. But 3 weeks ago, Vivienne mailed me, with no note attached, a small silver locket that had belonged to her own grandmother. A genuine piece, not a reproduction. One of the few real things she had left. Inside the locket was a photograph of a woman I had never met. On the back of the photograph, in pencil, was written, Tessa Ashcroft, 1948, the woman who had worn the ring on my finger first. I put the locket in a box on my dresser. I do not wear it, but I do not throw it away. Margot had told me to watch for the apologies in small ways. This was one. There may be more, there may not. I have made my peace either way. Soren and I are getting married on a Saturday in October at a small inn in Litchfield County, with 38 people present, half of whom are mine. We are not going to have a sit-down dinner. We are going to have a buffet and a bonfire and a band that plays too loud. Gerald has agreed to walk Vivienne down the aisle, if she comes. He has told me privately that he hopes she will. He has also told me privately that he will not be devastated if she doesn't. I think this is the most honest sentence Gerald Ashcroft has ever said out loud. I sat at Pop's bench this morning. I want to tell you about that because it is where I want to end this. The morning light comes into the workshop through the front window at exactly the angle it came in when I was 9 years old. Pop's stool is worn into the shape of him. I sit in his shape. The bench has the hollow in it from his forearm. I put my forearm into the hollow. It almost fits. Not quite. My arms are smaller than his were. But over time, and this is something I did not understand until I started using the bench daily. Over time, my forearm is making a smaller hollow inside his hollow. The wood remembers. The wood remembers him. The wood is starting to remember me. A stone tells you who's been holding it. A workbench does too. So does a ring. So does a kitchen in Ashford Hollow that has stopped being a kitchen I have to make myself small to fit into. So does a life, if you stop polishing the surface and start letting the inclusions show. I want to tell you what I learned. Not about Vivienne. I learned almost nothing about Vivienne that I had not already known. What I learned was about me. I had spent 2 years dimming myself in the kitchen of a woman who was performing a life she could not afford. I had let her dim me because I had told myself it was love. It wasn't love. It was a habit. The habit of being the easiest person in the room. The habit of making myself the soft place where other people's sharp edges could land without consequence. I am not the easiest person in the room anymore. I think I am, in fact, sometimes a difficult person now. I am told by friends I trust that this is a feature and not a bug. I used to think the loudest people at the table were the most powerful. Now I know they're just the ones who are most afraid of silence. If you are watching this, if you have ever been the quietest person at a table where someone else was performing an entire life out of stones they did not own, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that you are not crazy, You saw exactly what you thought you saw. The second is that you do not have to set the house on fire to walk out of it. You can leave the door open 1 inch, not wide enough to walk back through, but not locked either. People can find their way back to a door that is 1 inch open if they ever decide to. The third thing, and I know I said two, but I am giving you a third, is this. Whatever it is that you have been polishing yourself to look like for the people who love you on conditions, stop. Stop now. The most valuable thing a stone can do, Pop used to say, is belong to somebody who actually loves it. The same is true of you. The same has always been true of you. The same will always be true of you, even if it takes you 34 years to believe it. I want to ask you something before I go. If you had been there, if you had been in that car on Saturday night with a velvet box on your lap and a man you loved driving silently beside you, and you knew the trap had been built for you long before you ever walked into the house, would you have told him then? Or would you have waited, like I did, and let the trap close on the woman who said it? I am still not sure I made the right choice. I think I made a choice. I think the difference between a right choice and a choice is something you only learn after the fact, and sometimes not even then. Tell me what you would have done. I am genuinely asking. The comments below are for people who have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping themselves. There is no right answer. There is only the answer you can live with. A stone remembers every hand that ever held it, even the ones that tried to pretend they hadn't. My name is Maren Halsway. Thank you for sitting with me. I'll see you in the next one.